Good evening. You're tuned into the Wavecast Radio. Overnight, automated trading systems across the United States triggered a cascading collapse. AI-driven trades, which now control over 80% of stock activity, reacted to internal signals faster than any human oversight could manage. The NASDAQ and S&P 500 experienced unprecedented volatility before freezing entirely. By the early hours of this morning, trillions of dollars in assets were effectively erased. Investors attempting to liquidate positions found no buyers. Brokers reported halted transactions, and the typical channels for emergency intervention were delayed by system overloads. Analysts now confirm that the AI feedback loops created runaway selling and failed risk controls simultaneously. By mid-morning, banks began imposing informal withdrawal limits. Some branches closed entirely without prior notice, and online banking platforms intermittently failed. Pensions, retirement accounts, and Social Security distributions have been delayed indefinitely in several states. Employees attempting to access funds to pay rent or utilities encountered frozen accounts. Payroll systems for private businesses are also reporting failures, causing layoffs to be processed automatically or suspended payments to employees. The first signs of housing instability are appearing as tenants miss rent deadlines due to financial system paralysis. Foreclosure timelines are accelerating silently, and families are being forced from homes without warning. Corporate offices in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles report that internal accounts are reflecting impossible numbers. Some firms show billions in losses within minutes. Insurance companies have halted new policies and delayed claims. Fuel distributors are revising contracts daily, citing payment uncertainties. The magnitude of this disruption is unprecedented in modern history, and it's spreading beyond financial centers. Small businesses dependent on automated credit approvals are halting operations. Supply chains, especially for perishable goods, are faltering. Consumers are already reporting empty shelves at local grocery stores, and early rationing has begun organically in several regions. Across 7 states, power utilities have begun rolling blackouts preemptively. Privatized electrical grids, reliant on continuous financing and maintenance, have reduced operations in anticipation of payment delays. Hospitals report limited generator fuel and are prioritizing critical care. Heating fuel is scarce, raising concerns for winter survival. Water systems in some municipalities are under strain due to delayed operational funding. Communication networks, including cellular towers, experience intermittent outages. Residents are being urged to conserve energy. Local emergency services are operating under contingency plans, but delays are widespread. Schools in multiple districts have announced immediate closures, citing uncertainty over payroll for staff and operational funding. Police departments are reducing overtime and call responses. Some officers have resigned due to frozen pensions and unpaid benefits. Emergency services are triaging requests, prioritizing urgent life-threatening situations. Community centers are being repurposed as temporary shelters or aid hubs in preparation for escalating displacement. Public safety is increasingly local and situational. Families report long lines at ATMs, uncertainty at grocery stores, and rising tensions in neighborhoods as resources tighten. Real estate markets have frozen in many areas. Mid-transaction home purchases are paused indefinitely. Eviction notices are being issued even as tenants struggle to access funds. Some households are leaving voluntarily before foreclosure proceedings, anticipating worsening financial conditions. Mortgage and lease defaults are predicted to spike in the coming weeks. Credit for home improvement, rental deposits, and new property purchases has vanished. Communities are facing a dual threat: loss of income and loss of shelter simultaneously. Local governments are advising residents to prepare for short-term displacement. Economic refugees are already moving from collapsed regions to areas with relatively stable employment and infrastructure. Migration creates overcrowding, housing shortages, and social tensions in receiving regions. Prices for rent and essential goods rise sharply where demand exceeds supply. Informal networks for shared housing and cooperative living are emerging. Residents adapt with barter systems and local currencies where federal money is temporarily inaccessible. Municipal leaders are struggling to coordinate services and prevent unrest. These early migrations hint at longer-term regional stratification, with some states effectively abandoned to collapse, while others maintain partial functionality. Market data shows that the AI-driven collapse did not affect all sectors equally. Technology, finance, and logistics companies bore the brunt. Essential goods producers and smaller localized industries retain operational continuity for now, but they are constrained by payment systems that no longer function reliably. Grocery stores, hospitals, and fuel suppliers increasingly operate in cash or barter, bypassing traditional banking channels. Cash remains scarce. Local community trust becomes a critical asset. Municipal and regional authorities are quickly shifting focus from economic growth to survival logistics. Federal authorities have made statements calling for calm. Treasury and Federal Reserve officials promise investigations and temporary stabilizing measures. However, no actionable relief is immediately visible on the ground. Confidence in national financial infrastructure has eroded. Trading halts, delayed payouts, and corporate inaction undermine public trust. Residents report anxiety, long lines at essential service points, and early signs of hoarding. The collapse is not just financial, it is social, manifesting as disrupted daily routines, loss of access, and uncertainty about immediate survival. The United States has entered a period of structural instability unseen in decades. Homes, jobs, pensions, and savings are all at risk. Citizens are beginning to form informal networks to exchange goods and services. Communities are preparing for interruptions in power, water, and food delivery. The station will continue to provide live updates as verified information becomes available. Survival strategies, adaptation, and observation of local conditions will define the next weeks and months. The reality is clear. The AI-driven market collapse is only the first step in a cascading economic and societal breakdown that will affect all Americans. Continuing our live coverage, the financial paralysis from yesterday's AI-driven market collapse has spread across the banking sector. Multiple federal and regional banks have implemented withdrawal limits to stabilize their internal ledgers. Customers are being told that only small daily amounts will be available until liquidity issues are resolved. Long lines have formed outside branches, while online banking portals intermittently fail or display outdated balances. Retirees relying on Social Security and personal pensions face delays in scheduled disbursements, leaving them unable to pay rent or buy groceries. Corporate payroll systems have frozen as credit verification and automated transaction approvals falter, leaving millions without paychecks. The systemic uncertainty is cascading into households that believe themselves secure. Market indices reflect the same collapse in confidence. The NASDAQ has lost nearly 40% of its value since last night, while the S&P 500 has fallen over 35%. Trading volume remains erratic, dominated by automated systems attempting to self-correct, creating feedback loops that distort pricing further. Traditional human intervention is proving ineffective. Investment funds report massive losses in equities, bonds, and commodities. Investors attempting to rebalance portfolios find algorithms preventing withdrawals or triggering further automated sell-offs. Corporate and government assurances of stability are failing to convince both markets and the public, creating widespread panic in virtual and physical trading environments. Layoffs are now escalating across multiple sectors. Finance and technology firms have suspended operations or furloughed staff temporarily, with the expectation of indefinite delays. Public sector employees, including local and state offices, report payroll disruptions that are preventing routine functions. Agricultural offices in the Midwest have furloughed a third of staff due to payroll system failures, raising concerns over crop monitoring, distribution, and emergency support. Trucking companies, logistics providers, and retail distribution centers are also reducing staff to minimal operational levels. Millions of Americans have effectively lost their livelihoods in a single week without formal notice or severance, heightening the immediate social strain across communities. Housing instability is accelerating alongside income loss. Mortgage payments are falling behind as automated verification systems halt, forcing lenders to default loans preemptively in some areas. Eviction notices are arriving for families unable to access frozen bank accounts, while other households voluntarily leave residences anticipating further disruption. Rent prices are soaring in states that maintain partial economic stability, creating localized housing crises. Financial insecurity is compounding pre-existing vulnerabilities, and cities with high living costs are reporting immediate pressure on homeless shelters and emergency accommodations. Temporary displacement is becoming permanent for some families. Inflation has begun to accelerate dramatically. Bread prices have risen from $3 to $12 in some regions. Milk now costs upwards of $9 per gallon, and gasoline is exceeding $22 per gallon. Local grocery stores are rationing supplies organically as delivery and pricing systems fail to reconcile across payment networks. Fuel shortages exacerbate supply chain delays, impacting heating oil distribution ahead of winter months. Communities are being forced to improvise distribution and rationing strategies while formal mechanisms remain paralyzed. The economic crisis is manifesting as tangible scarcity rather than abstract market metrics. Bank closures and ATM limitations have sparked growing unrest in urban centers. Residents report waiting hours for access to cash, often leaving without completing transactions. Local credit unions are beginning to offer limited emergency loans and bartering alternatives. Public anxiety is spreading, with calls to municipal authorities demanding explanations. Some states are attempting to coordinate temporary relief programs, but delays in funding and bureaucratic bottlenecks hinder rapid implementation. Citizens are learning to rely on informal networks for immediate survival rather than institutional support. Unemployment benefits are delayed, leaving families without a financial buffer. Social services are inundated with requests for emergency support, but agency staff are reduced or unpaid due to frozen payrolls. Early childhood programs, food pantries, and school lunch programs are halting services in affected regions. This lack of consistent support is driving a reliance on neighbors, community groups, and emerging barter networks. Survival is increasingly a local, decentralized effort. National coordination is largely absent, and public communications emphasize temporary measures rather than actionable solutions. Small businesses are particularly hard hit. Credit lines have dried up, preventing replenishment of inventory or payroll. Service providers, independent contractors, and retail shops face closures as automated payment systems fail. Suppliers are refusing delivery without immediate cash or verifiable credit guarantees. As a result, neighborhoods are experiencing the simultaneous collapse of commerce and daily convenience. Communities reliant on these businesses for food, medicine, and essential services are feeling the impact first. Cashless systems fail when liquidity itself disappears, forcing innovation in barter and informal exchange. Financial uncertainty has triggered early waves of social tension. Individuals are relocating from economically collapsed regions to more stable states, creating pressure on housing, public resources, and community cohesion. Migration flows are intensifying, and local officials report rising concerns about law enforcement capacity and public order. Residents are improvising collective resource management and mutual aid networks. Early experiments with local currencies, barter, and cooperative housing arrangements are emerging organically. While these adaptations provide temporary relief, they also highlight the failure of centralized systems to respond effectively. As this broadcast continues, it is evident that the AI-driven collapse has transcended financial markets. The NASDAQ and S&P 500 are no longer indicators of stability. They are signals of systemic vulnerability. Millions of Americans are losing access to money, jobs, and housing simultaneously. Supply chains are disrupted, inflation is spiking, and essential services are strained. The federal response remains minimal and largely ineffective, leaving states, communities, and individuals to adapt in real time. This station will continue providing verified real-time updates to help listeners navigate the evolving crisis. Immediate survival strategies, cooperation, and resource sharing are becoming the most valuable currencies in this new reality. We continue our coverage of the U.S. economic collapse. Energy infrastructure is now showing critical stress. Privatized power grids across 7 states, including Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and parts of New York, are operating under rolling blackouts. Utility operators report fuel supply delays and deferred maintenance due to frozen credit lines. Without prompt intervention, blackout cycles are expected to extend. Residents are being advised to prepare for several hours without electricity, and some communities are reporting outages lasting into the evening. Hospitals are relying on backup generators, but fuel supplies are limited. Critical care operations are being prioritized, leaving elective procedures and non-urgent cases delayed indefinitely. Water and sanitation services are beginning to feel strain in several metropolitan regions. Treatment facilities report challenges in processing payments and coordinating deliveries of chemicals and fuel. Some smaller municipalities have announced reduced operating hours for water pumps and sewage treatment. In affected areas, residents are being urged to limit consumption and conserve resources wherever possible. Local authorities emphasize that drinking water remains safe, but non-essential services may be suspended without notice. Delays in infrastructure maintenance compound the stress on electricity and transportation systems, creating a feedback loop of logistical difficulty. Hospitals are facing unprecedented operational challenges. Backup generators can sustain critical functions for only limited periods. Fuel rationing, delayed supply deliveries, and reduced staffing due to payroll freezes have forced medical administrators to triage operations strictly. Emergency departments are limiting admissions to life-threatening cases. Pharmacies report low inventory and difficulty receiving shipments due to logistical disruptions. Rural hospitals face even greater challenges, with isolated communities experiencing intermittent care. Staff shortages, equipment delays, and power interruptions create conditions where the margin for error is dangerously small. Schools in multiple districts are closing indefinitely due to funding freezes, delayed payroll, and utility disruptions. Educators are unable to maintain classrooms, while parents are forced to care for children at home. Online learning platforms reliant on electricity and internet access are unreliable in affected areas. Students lose both education and nutrition, as many schools provide free or subsidized meals. Local authorities are scrambling to coordinate alternative food and care solutions, but resources are limited. Closures are fracturing communities, leaving families without central support networks. Law enforcement agencies are reporting critical staffing shortages. Approximately 30% of police officers in some urban areas have resigned or taken unpaid leave due to frozen pensions and financial instability. Remaining officers are responding only to high-priority emergencies, leaving property crimes and non-urgent calls unattended. Municipal command centers are overwhelmed, attempting to allocate limited personnel across vast service areas. Community patrols and neighborhood watch groups are forming organically to fill gaps, but coordination remains informal. Public safety is increasingly decentralized and reactive, reliant on local improvisation rather than formal enforcement structures. Telecommunications and internet services are unreliable. Cellular networks intermittently fail, and broadband connections experience latency and outages. Local mesh networks, operated by community volunteers, are emerging as alternative channels for communication. Residents share information about resource availability, security updates, and travel conditions. These informal networks are critical in areas where traditional infrastructure is failing. Without reliable communication, emergency coordination, and situational awareness are significantly hampered, compounding the societal stress caused by economic collapse. Transportation infrastructure is also affected. Fuel rationing combined with credit verification issues has slowed freight deliveries and commuter travel. Road maintenance is being deferred, leaving highways in poor condition. Public transit systems are operating at reduced schedules due to payroll freezes and fuel shortages. Supply chains for food, medical supplies, and essential goods are under pressure. Delays propagate quickly, creating localized shortages. Urban residents are experiencing long waits at gas stations and delivery points. Rural areas with less redundancy face even more severe disruptions. Emergency services are forced to adapt continuously. Fire departments, ambulances, and search and rescue units are prioritizing life-threatening incidents. Standard protocols such as scheduled inspections, fire safety outreach, and non-critical services are postponed. Hospitals coordinate directly with emergency responders to triage transportation of critical patients. Residents report that response times have doubled or tripled in some areas. Communities increasingly rely on informal emergency coordination, including volunteer networks, neighborhood alerts, and decentralized first aid teams. Rolling blackouts and infrastructure stress reveal how interconnected systems are failing simultaneously. Electricity, water, communications, and transportation all depend on stable financial and administrative operations. A failure in one sector ripples through others. Residents report frustration and anxiety as essential services become unpredictable. Local authorities attempt reassurance, but the pace of collapse challenges standard governance responses. Public confidence in institutional continuity erodes rapidly, leading to adaptive strategies, rationing, stockpiling, and community-level organization. As of this broadcast, the U.S. infrastructure is under unprecedented strain. Hospitals, schools, utilities, and law enforcement are functioning at minimal capacity, and citizens are left to improvise survival strategies. Rolling blackouts, water shortages, unreliable communications, and transportation delays compound economic disruption. The cumulative effect is a society forced to reorganize around local resilience rather than federal guidance. This station will continue to document developments as they occur, providing verified updates to help listeners navigate ongoing disruptions. Community cooperation and situational awareness remain the most critical resources in this evolving crisis. As federal and state systems continue to falter, communities across the country are improvising survival strategies, finding creative ways to sustain themselves in the absence of reliable government support. Barter networks have emerged in urban neighborhoods, rural towns, and suburban enclaves, connecting residents who exchange food, fuel, clothing, and medical supplies directly. These systems bypass traditional banking channels which are failing or frozen and provide essential lifelines for survival. In Chicago, for example, a volunteer-run network of roughly 40 families rotates responsibilities for distributing food and supplies, ensuring that the most vulnerable households receive what they need. Trust has become the currency of social interaction, often more valuable than cash, and those who maintain reliability and integrity accrue social capital that determines their standing and influence within the community. Reputation and reciprocity govern participation, and communities that successfully manage these networks experience higher cohesion, fewer conflicts, and greater operational efficiency despite limited resources. Local currencies are beginning to appear in multiple regions, providing an alternative medium of exchange where federal money has lost practical value or accessibility. These currencies are often backed by tangible assets such as food, tools, or labor commitments, and operate on mutual trust and collective accountability. Some towns have implemented token systems for labor exchange, allowing residents to trade work hours for goods and services. In parts of Michigan and Pennsylvania, community-led ledgers meticulously track contributions and entitlements, creating localized microeconomies that function independently of national banks or financial institutions. These informal monetary systems enable communities to stabilize trade, prevent hoarding, and maintain access to essential resources. While they lack legal recognition, they provide the operational structure necessary to preserve daily life, ensuring that basic commerce continues in a context where traditional economic hierarchies have collapsed. Barter and local currency systems are reshaping social norms and power dynamics. Participation in these networks is determined by reliability, skill, and trustworthiness, rather than wealth or formal position. Community members who demonstrate consistent cooperation gain influence, while those who exploit scarcity risk being excluded from essential networks. This shift reinforces collaboration and mutual aid as critical survival strategies, emphasizing competence and integrity over monetary value. Communities are discovering that social cohesion, reputation, and reciprocity are more effective than formal authority in maintaining stability. Informal councils and volunteer coordinators oversee resource distribution, mediate disputes, and monitor compliance with agreed-upon rules, fostering a sense of fairness that formal institutions have failed to uphold. In addition to stabilizing essential goods, these systems encourage the exchange of knowledge, skills, and labor, which has become increasingly important in regions where specialized services are scarce. Residents share agricultural expertise, medical guidance, mechanical skills, and energy management knowledge, further strengthening community resilience. These exchanges also create interdependencies that enhance trust, deter theft or exploitation, and ensure that collective effort is rewarded. The success of barter networks and local currencies demonstrates that human adaptability, cooperation, and pragmatic social structures are now more critical than financial wealth in determining survival outcomes. Communities that embrace these principles are better equipped to endure the ongoing economic collapse and maintain functionality even as federal oversight dwindles. Ultimately, these emergent systems illustrate the capacity of ordinary citizens to sustain society when conventional institutions fail. Communities that successfully integrate barter, local currencies, and shared labor demonstrate resilience, operational efficiency, and moral cohesion. Residents are learning to prioritize collective well-being, leveraging trust, cooperation, and practical knowledge to navigate scarcity, maintain order, and secure survival. These networks are redefining what it means to be part of a functioning society in the United States of 2026, highlighting that adaptability, mutual aid, and localized governance are now the cornerstones of continuity, stability, and hope in a nation facing profound economic collapse. Repurposed commercial spaces are transforming into communal centers. Vacant shopping centers, office buildings, and warehouses are converted into temporary distribution points for food, fuel, and medical supplies. These locations also serve as coordination hubs for neighborhood security, shared transport, and information dissemination. Communities are organizing volunteers to maintain these hubs, set ration limits, and enforce fairness. The improvisation demonstrates human adaptability under extreme stress. Spaces that once represented commerce now sustain survival networks, bridging gaps left by failing infrastructure. Mesh networks have become a lifeline for communities navigating the ongoing collapse. Volunteers across neighborhoods install routers, antennas, and signal repeaters to ensure continuous local connectivity, independent of traditional internet and cellular systems, which are increasingly unreliable. These networks carry critical updates on resource availability, neighborhood security, and emergency coordination. Residents transmit information about food supplies, medical aid, energy conservation, and transportation status, allowing communities to make informed decisions quickly. In many regions, these decentralized networks have replaced mainstream media, which is often delayed, censored, or overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. Real-time communication through mesh systems enables rapid responses to threats, identification of safe routes, and coordination of volunteer teams, giving communities a vital edge in survival. Individuals skilled in network maintenance and data sharing become essential actors, their expertise directly influencing local safety and access to resources. These networks not only sustain operational efficiency, but also reinforce social cohesion by fostering collaboration, trust, and a shared sense of purpose among residents facing uncertainty. Migration from collapsed economic zones is reshaping the demographic and social landscape. Cities in the Midwest, where payroll systems and banking infrastructure failed first, have experienced a surge of displaced residents seeking stability in smaller towns and semi-functional regions. Housing shortages, strained public utilities, and overburdened local services are immediate challenges, forcing communities to improvise solutions quickly. Informal agreements govern housing arrangements, food sharing, and labor contributions, ensuring that newcomers contribute to communal survival rather than exacerbate scarcity. While friction occasionally arises over resources or cultural differences, the overwhelming necessity of cooperation outweighs conflict. Communities recognize that integrating migrants strengthens collective resilience, providing labor, skill sets, and knowledge essential for managing the ongoing collapse. Long-standing social networks adapt to accommodate newcomers, reshaping leadership roles, trade relationships, and neighborhood security measures. The redistribution of population is creating dynamic, adaptive social ecosystems. Neighborhoods, once homogeneous, now consist of a mixture of original residents and economic refugees, creating new patterns of interaction, collaboration, and responsibility. Barter networks expand to incorporate the skills and resources of migrants, while mesh networks extend coverage to newly settled areas. Communities are innovating governance structures, relying on situational leadership, rotating responsibilities, and consensus-based decision-making to prevent conflict and ensure resource access. These adaptive mechanisms, though informal, are proving more effective than conventional bureaucratic models in navigating scarcity, power outages, and infrastructure breakdowns. Social cohesion, reputation, and reciprocity remain central to sustaining order and encouraging participation from all residents. Communication and migration intersect to reinforce survival strategies. Mesh networks help identify available housing, track the movement of displaced populations, and allocate scarce resources efficiently. Volunteers act as coordinators, relaying information about medical aid, food distribution, and fuel access to ensure equitable distribution. These networks also serve as early warning systems, transmitting alerts about local hazards, crime, or environmental risks. The combination of decentralized communication and cooperative migration planning allows communities to adapt faster than traditional institutions, mitigating the worst effects of economic and infrastructural collapse. Residents increasingly rely on personal observation and community intelligence to make decisions that would once have been guided by formal authorities, demonstrating the emergence of a self-governing social ecosystem. Ultimately, these adaptive strategies highlight the resilience of ordinary citizens in the face of systemic failure. Mesh networks and cooperative migration are not just survival tools. They are the backbone of a new societal framework that values collaboration, practical knowledge, and mutual aid over financial status or formal authority. Communities that effectively integrate newcomers, maintain communication infrastructure, and coordinate resource sharing are more likely to endure prolonged collapse, while those that fail to adapt experience rapid deterioration in morale, security, and functionality. The United States in 2026 is no longer defined solely by national governance or economic metrics. It is being reshaped by the ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptability of its residents. One network, one neighborhood, and one migration route at a time. Small-scale agriculture and urban gardening are gaining importance. Residents with access to land are planting vegetables, raising poultry, and developing small irrigation systems. Local farmers cooperate to share seed, labor, and harvests. Community gardens emerge in abandoned lots, apartment courtyards, and repurposed schoolyards. These efforts mitigate shortages from disrupted supply chains and offer a measure of autonomy from failing corporate food systems. Knowledge of practical skills from planting to repair work becomes crucial for long-term survival, and communities begin valuing hands-on expertise over formal credentials. Neighborhood security is also evolving. With law enforcement stretched thin, communities implement cooperative watch systems. Volunteers patrol neighborhoods, share alerts, and coordinate responses to theft or civil disturbances. Safety protocols, rationing rules, and emergency evacuation plans are discussed collectively. Collaboration replaces traditional enforcement, creating localized systems of accountability. In areas with high trust and participation, these measures prevent violence and protect scarce resources. Survival now depends on vigilance, cooperation, and reputation as much as material assets. Healthcare adaptation has become a lifeline for communities across the country as formal institutions falter. Local clinics, volunteer medical teams, and retired healthcare professionals have mobilized to provide triage, urgent care, and treatment for chronic conditions. Supplies, including medications, bandages, and basic medical equipment, are pooled and shared between neighborhoods and regions to ensure continuity of care. Residents with prior medical training, from nurses to emergency responders, provide guidance and perform essential procedures, filling gaps left by inaccessible or shuttered hospitals. Improvised clinics have sprung up in schools, community centers, warehouses, and even private homes, offering care or infrastructure permits. Telemedicine services, supported by mesh network communications, enable remote diagnosis, coordination, and instruction, connecting isolated regions to more resource-rich areas. These systems are not a substitute for fully funded healthcare, but serve as vital stopgaps, preventing unnecessary deaths and maintaining a semblance of medical order amid widespread collapse. Communities rapidly adapt protocols, rationing supplies while prioritizing the most urgent cases and creating ad hoc medical hierarchies based on expertise, resource availability, and situational urgency. Psychological and emotional resilience is emerging as a cornerstone of survival in this fractured nation. Residents face unprecedented stress, fear, and uncertainty as economic and social structures collapse. Yet mutual aid networks, cooperative labor, and shared responsibilities help mitigate the effects of isolation and anxiety. Community gatherings, whether for distribution of supplies, shared meals, or coordination meetings, create opportunities for connection, reinforce social bonds, and bolster morale. Storytelling and informal education pass critical knowledge while also strengthening identity, cultural memory, and emotional stability. Parents coordinate child care cooperatively, freeing one another to attend to work, trade, or security duties, while elders contribute wisdom, practical skills, and historical perspective. These adaptive social networks are vital, not just for physical survival, but for mental well-being, providing reassurance and structure in the absence of institutional support. Resourcefulness and cooperation extend into all aspects of daily life. Residents organize rotational work schedules to manage water collection, fuel distribution, food preparation, and maintenance of communication networks. Skills training, ranging from first aid to mechanical repair, is shared peer-to-peer, ensuring that knowledge is widely dispersed and that communities remain self-reliant. Barter economies and local currencies further strengthen social cohesion, as participation in trade and mutual aid creates interdependency, reinforcing trust and collective responsibility. Individuals who demonstrate reliability and competence gain social capital, and those who contribute to communal welfare are rewarded with access to scarce resources. Communities that successfully integrate these practices demonstrate higher resilience, reduced conflict, and better survival outcomes than neighborhoods with weaker social cohesion. The mental health dimension of collapse is equally crucial. Fear and uncertainty pervade daily life, yet residents have adapted mechanisms to cope, including peer counseling, communal problem-solving sessions, and group reflection. Children are integrated into cooperative routines, learning resilience, responsibility, and practical skills through shared work and mentorship. Elders provide guidance on emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and maintaining routines, ensuring that knowledge and value survive even amidst chaos. These practices create stability and reinforce social bonds, which are essential to sustaining functional communities in areas where government and institutional support have all but vanished. The psychological infrastructure created by mutual trust and shared responsibility becomes a survival mechanism as important as food, water, or electricity. Overall, human adaptability, practical intelligence, and social cooperation have become the defining assets for survival. Communities capable of integrating healthcare improvisation, psychological support, knowledge transfer, and resource coordination demonstrate a capacity to endure prolonged economic and social collapse. Networks built on trust, reputation, and reciprocity now define access to critical resources and determine outcomes in everyday life. As the U.S. economy continues to unravel in 2026, the success of any community is no longer dictated by government intervention or financial instruments, but by its residents' ability to organize, innovate, and support one another. The balance between survival and chaos rests firmly in the hands of ordinary citizens acting collectively, illustrating that human ingenuity and solidarity are the most powerful forces in navigating this ongoing national crisis. As this broadcast continues, it is clear that survival depends on local organization, trust, and cooperation. The federal government remains largely ineffective, leaving communities to navigate the consequences of financial collapse independently. Informal currencies, barter networks, mesh communications, and repurposed infrastructure define the new operational reality. Migration and population shifts are inevitable, reshaping the demographic and social landscape. This station will continue documenting developments, highlighting strategies that allow residents to endure while larger systems fail. Adaptation, observation, and collaboration are essential for navigating these unprecedented challenges. The United States has entered a period of unprecedented political and institutional fragmentation, a reality now visible in every state and municipality. Federal authority is largely ineffective, and many regions operate independently, with governance, security, and basic services managed at the community level. Some areas, designated economic stabilization zones, retain partial infrastructure, functioning communication networks, and limited supply chains, providing a relative degree of order and predictability. In contrast, collapsed zones experience near-total systemic failure. Banks no longer operate, utilities falter without maintenance or funding, transportation is erratic, and social services are virtually non-existent. Residents in stabilized regions now face an influx of economic refugees seeking resources, shelter, and safety, while those in collapsed zones improvise survival networks, relying on barter, communal cooperation, and local leadership. Local governments and municipalities act autonomously, distributing food, coordinating emergency services, and maintaining security with minimal oversight. The result is a patchwork nation where geography determines access to stability, and the traditional social contract has fragmented, leaving citizens to depend on local observation, collaboration, and initiative rather than federal guidance. Community adaptation has become the central strategy for survival. In areas where formal institutions have failed, residents have established informal barter economies, local currencies, and mutual aid networks to sustain essential trade and access to services. Volunteer teams organize medical care, transportation of goods, and communications through decentralized mesh systems, connecting neighborhoods and towns that otherwise would be isolated. Skills, knowledge, and labor are pooled, replacing functions once handled by corporate and federal entities. Migration from collapsed regions increases stress on stabilized areas, and disputes over scarce resources require careful negotiation, collective decision-making, and trust based on reputation rather than legal authority. Those communities that foster strong social cohesion demonstrate higher survival rates, more effective resource distribution, and a greater ability to maintain security and stability. Meanwhile, fractured neighborhoods experience rising crime, scarcity-driven conflict, and social instability, highlighting the crucial role of human relationships in sustaining society when formal structures fail. Residents are learning to rely on situational awareness, practical skills, and adaptive intelligence. Everyday observation: who arrives first to distribute supplies, who maintains security, who adapts to changing conditions, has replaced bureaucratic instruction as the determinant of effective action. Communities track migration patterns, anticipate shortages, and develop contingency plans using a combination of local knowledge and improvisation. Resource management, energy conservation, and logistics have become daily survival priorities, and leadership is earned by competence and cooperation rather than appointment. Even in relatively stable zones, residents cannot assume continuity. Minor disruptions ripple quickly across social and economic networks, forcing constant vigilance and adaptation. In collapsed regions, social infrastructure is both fragile and vital. Neighbors coordinate protective patrols, share emergency medical knowledge, and establish rotating responsibilities for essential tasks such as water collection, food distribution, and energy management. Informal leadership councils mediate disputes and set communal rules that are respected because they are practical and fair. Collective observation and accountability replace enforcement by federal agencies, creating localized systems of governance that prioritize survival and equity within each community. Where these networks break down, chaos quickly follows. As trust fractures, resources are hoarded, and opportunistic crime rises. The difference between resilience and collapse increasingly depends on human cooperation rather than technology, money, or formal institutions. This broadcast will continue to monitor the evolving situation, documenting both the failures and successes of communities as they navigate the fractured nation. The United States of 2026 is no longer a monolithic entity. It exists instead as a mosaic of stabilized, semi-functional zones and collapsed regions improvising their own governance and survival strategies. Adaptation, observation, and social cohesion have emerged as the defining elements of functioning society. Listeners are urged to pay attention to local conditions, maintain trust networks, and contribute to community efforts where possible. In a nation where federal authority has faltered, it is these adaptive networks, formed by ordinary citizens acting collectively, that are determining who survives and who thrives amidst the ongoing economic and societal collapse. Media control and censorship are key features of the current environment. Corporate news networks have curtailed independent reporting, heavily influenced by political and financial pressures. In this vacuum, independent broadcasts like this one serve as vital lifelines for verified information. Community-driven reporting is emerging through decentralized platforms, mesh networks, and listener contributions. Stories of survival, scarcity, and cooperation are shared in real time, providing guidance and morale to those navigating the collapse. Residents increasingly rely on local knowledge and trusted sources, filtering out misleading narratives that downplay the crisis. Truthful communication becomes as essential as food, fuel, or water. Human stories reveal both vulnerability and resilience. Parents struggle to feed and protect children, Retirees navigate frozen pensions and healthcare disruptions, and displaced individuals seek shelter and security. Despite these challenges, acts of kindness, mutual aid, and shared labor illuminate pathways to survival. Elderly citizens contribute expertise and wisdom, young adults volunteer for community patrols, and families pool resources for collective benefit. Narratives of perseverance, creativity, and cooperation demonstrate that even amid systemic failure, human solidarity can form the backbone of society. These micro-level successes highlight adaptive capacity where macro-level institutions have failed. Supply chains remain fractured. Fuel, food, and medical deliveries are limited and unpredictable. Localized distribution centers and repurposed commercial spaces serve as temporary hubs for essential goods. Residents with vehicles, energy storage, or specialized knowledge often coordinate delivery networks, sometimes spanning dozens of miles. Urban areas face congestion and scarcity more acutely, while rural communities struggle with isolation and limited access to resources. Residents improvise schedules, rationing systems, and cooperative management strategies to mitigate risk. These emergent networks demonstrate the importance of observation, trust, and adaptability in navigating disrupted infrastructure. Political power is uneven. States and municipalities operate semi-independently, creating friction between regions with differing levels of stability. Governance gaps amplify uncertainty in collapsed zones, where informal community leadership replaces traditional authority. Stabilized zones attempt to coordinate with neighbors while resisting influxes of displaced populations, sometimes erecting barriers, rationing entry, or imposing local regulations. Tensions arise, yet cooperation persists where mutual survival is possible. The traditional federal hierarchy has been replaced by pragmatic, decentralized decision-making, emphasizing functionality over formal law. Education and knowledge transfer have suffered unprecedented disruption across the United States. Schools remain closed indefinitely, leaving millions of children without formal learning environments. Parents and local volunteers are improvising educational programs in homes, repurposed community centers, and shared spaces. Lessons are improvised, schedules are flexible, and curricula are adapted to survival priorities, emphasizing practical knowledge, critical thinking, and problem solving. Informal apprenticeship programs flourish. Carpenters, mechanics, electricians, and farmers pass skills directly to younger generations. Peer-to-peer instruction, group study sessions, and mentorship networks maintain continuity in literacy, numeracy, and technological expertise. These skills are essential not just for survival, but for navigating local barter systems, decentralized currencies, and mesh communication networks. Digital skills, including operating radio links and community computing hubs, have become vital. Traditional academic credentials are no longer the measure of competence. Instead, adaptability, resourcefulness, and the ability to solve real-world problems determine a child's capacity to thrive. Families collaborate across households, pooling knowledge, teaching in small groups, and using storytelling as a method to pass down both practical and cultural understanding. Communities increasingly recognize that ensuring the next generation retains this knowledge is critical to sustaining resilience over the long term. Healthcare access remains inconsistent and heavily strained under the ongoing crisis. Hospitals operate with limited fuel and generator capacity, prioritizing urgent care while deferring non-critical procedures indefinitely. Local clinics, volunteer medical teams, and retired healthcare professionals have mobilized to provide triage, routine treatment, and emergency interventions. Communities are establishing emergency stockpiles of medicine, vaccines, and essential medical supplies, coordinating distribution through informal networks and local councils. Vanish communication systems are critical for informing residents about the locations of treatment centers, availability of resources, and emerging outbreaks of disease or injury clusters. Peer-to-peer knowledge sharing allows communities to identify symptoms, improvise first aid, and stabilize patients before professional care becomes accessible. Mental health support has emerged organically, often through peer counseling, collective discussion circles, and storytelling, providing emotional processing and reducing psychological strain in high-stress environments. The cohesion and cooperation within a community directly influence health outcomes. Neighborhoods with strong networks manage both physical and mental health challenges more effectively. Social infrastructure, trust, mutual aid, and shared responsibility is now as vital to survival as physical infrastructure like hospitals, water systems, and power grids. Residents are discovering that health outcomes depend not only on supplies, but on their ability to self-organize, share knowledge, and maintain local communication systems, reinforcing that the strength of human networks defines community resilience in the ongoing collapse. Social cohesion, trust, and cooperation have emerged as the most essential survival tools in this fractured nation. In every community, informal networks are defining the boundaries of access to resources, labor, and vital information. Reputation and reliability now function as a form of currency, dictating who is trusted to handle critical tasks, distribute scarce supplies, or provide shelter and medical aid. Reciprocity governs interactions. Those who contribute and cooperate gain access to shared food, energy, and communication networks, while hoarding or selfish behavior results in social exclusion. Neighborhood committees, volunteer patrols, and barter networks are replacing conventional governance, and their effectiveness is measured not by official authority, but by tangible results. How quickly repairs are made, how efficiently supplies are allocated, and how well disputes are resolved. Migration, displacement, and scarcity have upended traditional power structures, rendering formal law enforcement and bureaucratic oversight largely irrelevant. Yet in this vacuum, ordinary citizens have stepped into leadership roles, coordinating essential services, monitoring security, and improvising solutions to unprecedented logistical challenges. The most resilient communities are those that recognize the interdependence of their members and actively foster collaboration, demonstrating that human adaptability and social cohesion are the true foundations of a functioning society under extreme pressure. Across the country, communities are crafting new systems of trade, communication, and security out of necessity. And these systems are evolving at a pace unmatched by any pre-collapse institutional response. Local bartering networks, often spanning multiple towns, provide access to food, fuel, and essential services where formal markets have failed. Mesh networks, improvised radio systems, and community bulletin boards allow for real-time information sharing and coordination, connecting residents with critical updates on resources, threats, and migration flows. Security arrangements are managed collectively. Rotating patrols, neighborhood watches, and volunteer response teams maintain order, enforce fairness, and provide protection against opportunistic crime. Even in regions that have suffered severe infrastructure failures, residents have adapted by repurposing abandoned buildings, converting schools, warehouses, and community centers into hubs for supplies, shelter, and coordination. These adaptive strategies highlight the ingenuity and resilience of citizens who are no longer dependent on centralized authority, but are instead actively shaping their survival environment. The United States of 2026 is being redefined not by political institutions, but by the everyday choices, resourcefulness, and cooperation of its people. This broadcast will continue to document these developments, providing guidance and truthful reporting, and reminding listeners that survival, recovery, and the rebuilding of society depend on local observation, adaptive strategies, and collective human effort. One community at a time, the nation is discovering a new form of resilience, an America shaped by collaboration, shared knowledge, and the enduring capacity of humans to respond to crises.